Good morning and welcome to this launch of a new handbook for health promoting green spaces. My name is Annika Östman. I'm head of communications at NORDGREEN, and I'll be moderating today's event that is about designing, planning, and managing healthy and green Nordic cities. Over the next hour, you'll gain tips from researchers about how to use various methods, models, and guidelines to achieve health promoting green space. In the panel discussion, you'll also gain inspiration on some success stories emerging from the Nordic region. And we are so happy to have so many of you online here with us today. And I thought we would start by using the chat function. If you could all just type in which city you're from and also which park is your favorite in your city. I'm here in Stockholm, and my favorite park is actually Kronobergsparken. It's a very small park and very hilly in my neighborhood where I live, but I've spent a lot of time in the playground and sledding down a very steep hill with my children. So I think that's my favorite because of all its fond memories. But please continue to use the chat during the event today. That's where we'll get your questions and your comments, and we'll engage during that. I also want to let you know we're going to share presentations and the recording after the event. Now I'm going to actually hand over to my colleague, Luciana, who's going to say some words about this really unique handbook.
Thank you, Annika, and good morning to everyone. My name is Luciane Gerborges. I am a Senior Research Fellow here at NORDGREEN, and together with my colleagues Lisa, Rore, and Kjell Nilsson, editor of this handbook that we are very proud and happy to launch today. I will provide with some information about the handbook, which is one of the outcomes of NORDGREEN. NORDGREEN stands for Smart Planning for Health and Green Nordic Cities, and it is a project financed by Nordforsk under the program Sustainable Urban Development in Smart Cities. We began this project in 2020, and during these 4 years, researchers from NORDGREEN, from the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, NMBU, Aalto University from Finland, and then also Swedish University of Agricultural Science, SLU, here from Sweden. We have been working together with Nordic cities to respond to their intentions of delivering like a health promoting green spaces. This handbook is a culmination of this project, and it aims to increase awareness about synergies between planning and public health, and deliver knowledge to practitioners on how to plan, design, and govern urban green spaces to promote human health and well-being. To reach this aim, and then to make this argument as tangible as possible, the researchers did partner with different types of Nordic cities, and 3 different types. What we conventionally call capital cities, which are municipalities close to capital cities, Täby in Sweden and Espoo in Finland. We also work with secondary cities, Stavanger in Norway and Aarhus in Denmark, and also rural communities, in Finland and Vilhelmina in Sweden. A little bit about how the handbook is structured. We contain 7 chapters, which in total, and then they are divided in 3 main parts. The part 1 includes 2 chapters, introduction and background, and the part 2 consists of 4 chapters. Each of them apply different methodologies to address planning and health, and this corresponds to what we call the NORD framework. And then the part 3, which it is a toolbox. I will just say a few words about part 1, especially the background chapter. Next slide, please. Yes, so in this chapter, Kjell Nilsson and Patrick Gran, they review the evidence linking green space and human health. And they provide many well-founded arguments about nature's healing ability. And based on these arguments, they suggest lessons for planning and designing urban green spaces. The NORD framework reflects this multidisciplinary approach for dealing with the connection between green spaces and health and well-being. So we have these 4 components. The first one is numbering, that makes use of epidemiological studies and statistical data to connect green space to health and well-being. Observing that makes use of public participatory techniques such as PPGIS to include like people's priorities and needs in city planning, regulating that enhances the interface between green infrastructure and health and well-being through planning, and designing that makes use of environmental psychology to inform the design of green spaces. And we will hear about this in a short while. I just want to say like a few words about part 3, especially like the toolbox, which is the final chapter in which like all the authors of the handbook, they come together and offer like a summary of the main methods, models, and guidelines for each component of the NORD framework. And they also provide details on how to use these tools and how practitioners can combine them to deliver health promoting green spaces. My final words goes to this, what's in this handbook, like for planners, health strategists, and also policymakers. We believe that we deliver then a richer understanding of the evidence for how green space can improve health, also facts for supporting and protecting urban green spaces, practical tools and guidelines for analyzing, co-creating, managing, and designing green space. And we believe that these tools, they can be tailored like to different contexts, and frameworks for guiding efficient ways of working with green space planning and management. And finally, inspiration from research and practice in several Nordic cities. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the session, and back to Annika.
Thank you so much, Luciana, and thank you all who are joining us from so many amazing cities today. I see in the chat Helsinki, Rotterdam, Oslo, Linköping, Vienna, Gdansk, Silkeborg, Arendal. We're so happy to have all of you, and if any of you are ever visiting these cities, make sure to check the chat for the favorite park to visit. I think you'll get some good tips here. But we're going to kick off our presentations, and the first presentation of the NORD framework will begin with Helena Nord, who is a landscape architect and professor at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences and a former professor at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. Helena's research focuses on use and experience of various urban green space. Now, Helena, you told me that, you live in Örebro and your favorite park is Örebro City Park. So maybe before we dive into your presentation, can you just tell me, why do you love this park?
Oh, that's easy. It has a lot of inspiring and fascinating flowers and trees, a lot of different functions, a lot of different types of spaces within the same city park. So it's full of experiences, full of plants.
Sounds great. And like we all need to make a visit. But now over to your presentation on numbering.
Thank you, Annika. Yes, hi everyone. And I will now share with you a short introduction to the work that me and my Norwegian colleagues, Emma Nordbø and Geir Aamodt, have worked with in this NORDGREEN project. If a researcher would count the number of green spaces or the proportion of green spaces in your neighborhood, then maybe there are plenty of green spaces around you. But perhaps to you, these spaces are inaccessible because there's a barrier, could be a railway or an unsafe crossing or something, between your home and the green space, making the green space less accessible. So objective access to green space near home is not the same as perceived access to green space. And similarly, objective health, such as absence of disease, is not necessarily equivalent to how people perceive their health. Perhaps you have a chronic disease, but you still perceive your health to be very good. In the numbering chapter, we unfold and we problematize differences between perceived and objective indicators of both access to green space and people's health. And we also discuss how urban planners can use objective and perceived indicators of both access to green space and people's health in their work with developing health promoting and sustainable municipalities. And the study, it builds on empirical, epidemiological, research in the 6 municipalities, part of the NORDGREEN Project. But in this presentation today, I will focus on examples from Täby. Access to green space. Just a second, it moved too fast. Can we go back in the presentation? I think it doesn't want me to. Let's see if I can go back. Now it works. Oh, one more. Okay. Access to green space can impact people's health and well-being in various ways. And to implement this knowledge in practice, planners need to acquire knowledge about the distribution of green space in the municipality, but also the health challenges among people living in these environments. But how should the municipalities go about mapping and exploring access to green space and people's health? So let's begin with the green space indicators to have a look at them. There exists a lot of map-based GIS data that can be downloaded and used to perform green space analysis. And national authorities such as Lantmäteriet in Sweden or GeoNorge in Norway, as well as worldwide open sources, they provide data on green space. And examples of objective indicators we use in the Täby study are, for example, total area of green space, mean distance from dwellings to nearest green space. And an example of a subjective green space indicator is survey data on people's perceived access to green space, which was the subjective indicator we used in Täby. And this subjective indicator was gathered from a Swedish survey called Medborgarundersökningen. And one of many questions in this survey was for the inhabitants to rate how they perceive their access to parks, to green spaces and nature in Täby using a scale from 1 to 10. So there are some pros and cons with objective green space indicators. So if we begin with the pros, the objective green space indicators, they can give an overview of the available green spaces within the municipality or other spatial scales, neighborhoods, for example. And they can easily be compared over time and hence be used to indicate changes in the physical environment and how trends in planning practice impact, for example, the access to green space. And when combined with health indicators, they can show inequalities in access to green space within the municipality. And there are some let's say, yes. And continuing with the cons, the objective indicators are often, sorry, there's problems with my computer. Continuing with the cons, the objective indicators are often collected on a municipal level, and they only capture people's objective access to green space, not their actual exposure to or their use of the green spaces, and they do not necessarily consider physical barriers. And finally, they are limited when it comes to capturing qualities of green spaces. As a planner, you may want to know more about the details in the environment, for example. And therefore, municipalities need to use or even collect their own perceived green space indicators by, for example, sending out a survey to targeted participants or targeted areas, or do experts' evaluations based on theoretical frameworks. So moving on to the health indicators now. Collection, analysis and usage of relevant health indicators are essential for monitoring public health. And health comprises of physical, mental and social aspects. So it's therefore recommended to use multiple indicators to assess the different aspects of health. So as with the green space indicators, health indicators can be either objective or subjective or perceived, so to say. Objective health indicators are measured independently of people's experiences, like a clinical diagnosis, for example. And the perceived indicators, on the other hand, are based on individual perceptions. So here in this table, there is a list, or there's examples of both objective and the subjective health indicators that have been used in this NORDGREEN project. So the objective indicators listed here are, for example, life expectancy, obesity, incidence of heart attack and stroke. And the subjective indicator is self-perceived health. And commonly, many of the objective indicators are reported on a municipal or district level. And it should also be mentioned that, well, this table does not provide a full account of existing indicators of health. But as you can see, there are a lot of indicators that can be used to monitor health in the population. And importantly, these indicators can be analyzed and visualized in maps. So here is a map as an example, and the figure provides a visual presentation of the proportion of residents reporting high or very high well-being in the 38 statistical areas in Täby. So the darker color, it equals higher proportion of survey respondents reporting high or very high well-being. So this is a way to visualize the health data, not only with numbers, but with maps. So leading over to the last slide now, finally, so what do we do with all the indicators? Well, planners are used to work with GIS, with different layers. They are used to add different kinds of green space data, but I think they are less familiar with health data. And this is an illustration of how information from the green space and health indicators can be compiled and analyzed jointly. And by making the maps out of the health data, joint analysis of health and green space data can be used in the planning process. And when combined, the indicators can show inequalities in access to green space, as mentioned, within the municipality. And the indicators can also help planners identify areas that score low on health statistics, for example, and in these locations focus on environmental changes to develop health-promoting neighborhoods and contribute to reduce health inequalities. So with that, I say thank you for listening and sorry for some technical issues.
Thank you so much, Helena. I wanted to just follow up with one quick question to you. In the presentation, you talked about objective and perceived as well as health indicators. Now, if a municipality has to prioritize either perceived or objective indicators, which one would you choose?
I would say that, well, both perceived and objective indicators are as important, and you can't really pick one or the other. They are not a proxy for one another. So I think you have to do both, but you could perhaps start with the objective indicators because it's easier to compile and then make a survey or something and collect perceived indicators.
So there's no way to cut corners, basically.
No, there's not. You have to do both. They measure different things.
Yes, no, that makes sense. Thank you so much, Helena. And we are moving along here. We are now going to have the observing chapter. And we have Marketa Kita with us, who is a professor of land use planning at Aalto University. Her expertise centers on human environment research and the development of place-based approaches in participatory planning. Marketa, good morning. And you live in Helsinki, and the coastline parks are some of your favorites. So before we jump into your presentation, could you let us know what it is that you love about these coastline parks?
Yeah, actually, I'm very eager to flag for these linear parks that let us be physical active in a beautiful landscape. What can be better?
So inspiring, yes. Well, over to you, Marketa, and your presentation on observing.
Good morning, everyone, and let me talk about the work of myself, Saana Rossi and Anna Kajosari, in Aalto University, Finland, where we have studied public participation as part of this NORDGREEN project. We have studied the ways the knowledge from people really transfer to planning, and perhaps we are also interested in smarter participation methods that are typically or traditionally performed. Let me try to move on. Yes, in Finland, I'm sure also in other Nordic countries and cities, public participation is a must in planning, but there are difficulties and challenges, like these kind of knots that I'm identifying in this slide. For example, that only a handful of people show up in the events we organize. Timing of participation can be too late. Those individuals who show up can concentrate on resisting changes. As a whole, participation can be complicated both from the perspective of a participant and a planner who aims to organize that. One solution for these challenges are new digital public participation methods, and among them is participatory mapping that we in our team in Aalto University have been developed for the last almost 20 years. Also in NORDGREEN project, we carried out participatory mapping exercises in 4 cities that were involved in our project: Stavanger, Vilhelmina, Espoo, and in these 4 cities. And when you do these kind of participatory mapping exercises have actually been realized in over 40 countries using the Maps on Air service that was originally developed in my team. And when you do this kind of data collection, what you typically concentrate on is the place-based collection of place-based knowledge about, for example, individual ways of using urban spaces, including green areas, or perhaps knowledge about your future wishes. What should be done to develop these places. But then you can combine that with non-place-based knowledge, for example, about concerning individual values and preferences, attitudes, individual background information, and then perhaps you are also interested in outcome variables like perceived health and well-being. You can also analyze this data, collected data in different ways and different levels. The most simple way to analyze is simply to look at the data visually on a map. And that often is already enough in planning. As soon as you put your data on map, it's very informative. But the true beauty of this participatory mapping methodology is that you can simultaneously analyze the subjective place-based knowledge with the rich data that so-called hard GIS is all about. And finally, you can also do perhaps some prediction and modeling, and I will later give you one example of that. I have to say that although NORDGREEN Project heavily concentrates on the restorative environments and the mental health or health benefits that are promoted by green areas, in our work package, we have took the liberty to look at environmental health promotion a bit more widely, because there are also other kind of health benefits that come, for example, from rather densely built urban environment. Namely, that kind of environment encourages you to be active and be physically active. So we have written about both of these in our chapter. By the way, there is still, of course, this social dimension of health and well-being, and I have to say that we have not yet enough studied that, and also internationally, the research activity in this aspect has been lower than the other two. Let me now show you a few examples of the kind of analysis we have done in NORDGREEN Project. And these examples are only from Espoo case. And this is because the Espoo case was so rich and the data was so wide. These analyses that I'm presenting have been co-created together with planners in Espoo. So the idea has been that we produce the kind of data that is usable for planners, that is really something that they can benefit from. First question that the planners in Espoo raised was that, can we somehow redefine the boundaries of neighborhoods by using the mapped data from people that we collected? Yes, we can. We did this kind of analysis by first looking at the ways individuals use urban spaces, and they all have their own individual activity spaces, and then when we put those on top of each other, we started to see where are the functional boundaries of neighborhoods. The next analysis that we did was based on the fact that in Espoo, people altogether mapped nearly 70,000 place markings. So it is clear that no city can immediately have resources to improve 70,000 places, that is for sure. So we started to think about that, is there a way to develop some kind of prioritization model to find out which places should be most urgently focused on? We knew from all these 70,000 places how often people visit these places and whether they feel positively or negatively about them. And when we put these two dimensions together, we actually end up getting fourfold model where different strategies also can be defined. And we were thinking that actually this category, we call it development priority. Those places that people visit often in their daily life, but that are felt very negatively about, maybe though we should prioritize the development of those especially. Luckily, there were only about 5% of places of that category. And when we studied more closely these places, they were very often in transport areas and built-up areas. So, and we can on the map very clearly see where they locate. I promised that I would tell one example of predictive analysis. The two previous ones were examples of explanatory phase analysis. Anna Kajosaari in our team led a project where we developed a predictive model of the perceived quality of green areas in Espoo. Although we had quite a few markings on green areas, I remember there were something like, I think 9,000 of them. We didn't have markings in all green areas in Espoo. So the idea of this model was to extend this knowledge collected from people to all green areas in Espoo to find out, like to predict how these places probably will be perceived by people. And in fact, this model also reveals what are actually the most important characteristics of positively experienced green areas. Vicinity of blue areas, forest biodiversity score, maintenance level, and absence of noise exposure were then critically identified as critically important characteristics. My final example from Espoo is a wonderful innovation that was done in a city to publish and storage the collected data, experiential data from people in a city-wide GIS system that is based on Locus Cloud service. And this is a service the city planners use on a daily basis in all planning projects. So now the data from people has been stored and saved as part of this system. So the soft experiential knowledge from people is here to be used by all actors in a city. And from each dot people have marked, you can find out a lot of additional knowledge. This was all I wanted to say this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maketa. And of course, you can all read more in the chapter. But I just wanted to follow up because it really is an outstanding achievement, your collaboration with Espoo and the possibility of creating these planning layers with information of people's preferences. And it seemed, and then that you could combine them with these technical planning layers. And this is both unique and also, I think, highly relevant to include people's perspectives in planning. So I wanted to ask, what opportunities do you see with the addition of this data of people's preferences?
Well, first of all, it really it's a way to take the knowledge produced by people seriously. So a city can really show participants that they value the knowledge from people, and this way the soft knowledge from people will be equally available together with all the other knowledge layers in the system. What is also interesting is that this way it is probably easy in a city to spread the knowledge to different actors working in different sectors in a city. So hopefully everybody knows in the city where that kind of data is available. And finally, I think this kind of storage allows, at least in principle, in the future, the collection of follow-up data. And that should interest cities very much now when the green transition is in the focus or high in the strategies of the cities.
Thank you, Maketa. Really fascinating. And again, you can find out more in the chapter, in the handbook. But now we're going to turn to the next chapter of the Nord framework, which is about regulating. And I'm turning to Anna Sunding, who is a doctoral student at the Swedish University of Life Sciences. agricultural sciences, sorry. She has a background as a landscape architect in Swedish municipal practice, and her interest lies in creating sustainable management of public green spaces. And Anna, you're joining us today from Malmö. Can you tell us what is your favorite park over there?
Yes, of course. I actually mentioned my favorite park to be, I think it is currently Alnarpsparken, which is the park where my university resides. And I think there are two reasons for that. First of all, it's the park that allows me to look out and see green. It's a park that I can take a walk in at lunch, but it's also a park where we have a lot of applied, very practical scientific experiments going on. So we measure the trees and we look at planting designs, and we have the landscape laboratory, which is, I think, world famous by now. So the everydayness of it combined with this very groundbreaking research, I think, is a good combination for a favorite park.
Yes, I think so. You get to have it both in your work and for your sort of your private mental health restoration, looking out the window. Sounds perfect. We look out over the water here, so we also have some element of that. But over to you and your presentation.
Thank you very much. And also thank you, of course, Helena and Marketa for the very interesting presentations. I hope you can all hear me well. I'm going to give a brief look into what we talk about in the 5th chapter, which is called regulating in the acronym, as Annika mentioned. And the title of the chapter is called Integrating Health Perspectives in Municipal Green Space Planning and Management, which I co-wrote together with Thomas Randrup, who's also here today. There we go. The focus of the chapter is the organization of green space planning and management at the municipal level, and in this Nordic context that we're in today. And we try to look at how alignment of visions, plans, and implementations can be used to foster health promoting green spaces. And we start off by asking ourselves, well, why is it then relevant to look at the Nordic perspective? Why do we do it in this very specific context? And what we've seen is that there are relatively similar planning systems in the Nordic countries, or Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Finland, that we're looking at here. There are differences on whether they are if the plans are legally binding and how important the regional and national level is, but on a general level, they're relatively similar. And in the municipal context, there is also some type of health or public health responsibility that is laid on the municipal level. The big difference here is that Denmark and Sweden mainly has this through national goals or recommendations, whereas Finland and Norway have legislated responsibilities in the Healthcare Act in Finland that states that there has to be regular public health reports, but also very specifically that all departments have a responsibility in working with health, not just the planning or the health department. Similarly, in Norway, there is the Public Healthcare Act, which demands some kind of public health overview, which is then used as a base for municipal planning. However, in these countries, there is also very strong municipal autonomy, and that means that it's very much up to the different municipalities to decide how they want to work and what they think is important. And what we see here is the map is actually over 1,000 different municipalities. So in this context, we see that due to this strong autonomy, 2 cities in Sweden can be as different as 1 city in Sweden and 1 in Norway, for instance. So what we have here are over 1,000 friends to look at and learn from. So what's the problem then? Why are we talking about this? In our work package, or in our focus, we did a lot of document studies and interviews with planners and managers and health strategists in these partner cities that we've worked with. And one thing that's very clear is that there is a relatively unclear goals when connecting green space and health, specifically on the overarching level. And this is, of course, a challenge when trying to work against other interests as you move on in the planning phases. Similarly, there is a lack of long-term funding. This is something that specifically is in the case of management and maintenance, where they see a range of challenges that are quite dire. And of course, we see a lot of coordination constraints, and that is something that we will talk more on now. We can see, if we look at this in a more contextual sense, we can see that the organization can be seen as a kind of model where we look at it in different levels. And then we have an overarching kind of policy level. This is where we have visions and policies, and this is the kind of guiding overarching goals that are supposed to guide our work. On the tactical levels, we find the different departments, and this is also where all the plans and strategies and all the strategic work is going on. And then we have the operational level, and this is the level of all the kind of activities and projects and work that takes place. And what we've been trying to do here is to look at this from what we call the programmatic alignment perspective, specifically in relation to the connection between green space and health. This would then be the question of how does the question of connections between green space and health travel from a very overarching policy level with goals and visions and through the departments and kind of becoming concretized in terms of guidelines and plans and so on, and then what is actually happening on the operational level. And this has two components, and one is this vertical alignment that I just talked about. How is the vision connected with the actual operation going on, but also the horizontal alignment, which is then the cross-sectorial collaboration here. And I think it's very important to remember when we talk about these things that there is often a lot of focus on cross-sectorial collaboration, but it's very important to not forget that there is a vertical component to this as well. We have to make sure that what we plan and what we want to do actually is turned into activities, and that it has an opportunity to do so based on the resources and capabilities available. So in the chapter, what we do is that we look at how green space and health can be connected on these different levels. And we do this based on 4 different examples. And as we mentioned before, there are very different contexts in these different cities. So the interesting thing is to see how the different cities or municipalities relate to their own context. So specifically, we looked at Wilhelmina and their comprehensive plan that was relatively recently finished. Täby has done a thematic green plan that has a specific health focus. In Espoo, there was a project and a plan made to coordinate people and activities. We will look at that a bit more. And in Aarhus, there is a specific new professional role, which is called a green bridge builder, which is an interesting concept where the role is hired 50% in the technical department and 50% in the health department, and specifically works to connect these 2 departments. But if we look at Espoo and this plan that they recently finished, it's called the Integrated Action Plan for Health, Responsive Blue-Green Infrastructure. And the reason I wanted to mention this specifically here is that it's a very good example of a combined kind of tactical and operational approach. And this was done as a part of a previous research project with this very focus, and there was relatively a small amount of resources, so they had to be very pragmatic in their approach. As we mentioned before, the Finnish Healthcare Act says that all departments has the responsibility to work with health in some way. So the project leader said, well, so we actually knew that there would be interested colleagues in all different departments to actually work with this because the legislation says so. And if we look at this as a kind of organizational scheme of the different departments in Espoo, we see that this project started in the environmental and building control. And what happened was that the start of the project, the project team tried to figure out who is responsible for health in all these different departments and what's going on. And what happened here was they realized that it was actually really hard to find out who is working with this and who is the relevant person and who are we supposed to contact to actually involve in this project. And similarly, which are the plans and which are the activities. And they had actually very little overview, and it was very hard to get this overview. So the project actually instead of moving on to something greater, they realized that what we need to do in this city is to actually create an overview of who is responsible and what type of responsibilities do we have here. Not in the least to kind of facilitate this type of everyday interactions. And for instance, if somebody is a newly employed, how will they know where to go to talk about these questions on another departments and so on? So the outcomes here was actually this plan that I just mentioned, that created an overview of the different responsibilities in the different departments, and also an overview of what plans to address this connection between green space and health, and what are the activities that is currently going on. And this is part of this was the physical product in terms of a plan, but the project leader mentioned that the real benefit of this was actually to create this kind of informal network, to figure out who your ally is in another department, and try to figure out a way to make this work in the long term. They keep on having meetings once a year or twice a year on a very relatively low pace in order to keep this as a support and not just another kind of responsibility that has to be done. And what they can see already is that there is a kind of language for departments that hasn't really had it before. The education department can now describe what they're doing with new argumentation, new rhetorics based on this support. So conclusion-wise then, I think what we have seen over and over again is that this really starts at policy level. Ideally, the best result is always if there is a strong political support behind these issues. And then ideally, it also addresses prioritization. What do we do and what is the focus here? And if we have two values or two options, what do we choose? On the tactical level, this is where the kind of synergies and conflicts are concretized. This is where we see what's actually happened on site. And this is where we need to find our allies in the different departments. And finally, then on an operational level, this is the key level basically, because this is where things take place and this is where things happen. But this is very often overlooked, and there is often a disconnect between what we do and plan and what is actually happening. So I think here it's important to realize that the capabilities of the operational level really has to be taken into account, both on policy and tactical levels. Make sure that we actually plan and have ambitions about aspects that can be realized. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna. And for those of you who want to find out more about this interesting chapter, make sure to see the regulating chapter in the NORD handbook. But before we move on to the next presentation, I wanted to follow up, Anna, and ask you that as a researcher, what is one key suggestion you would make to a practitioner who's struggling with vertical and horizontal alignment?
Well, I think based on what we've done, I think there is a key issue on actually figuring out how to make these things, not only how to start them, but also how to keep them going over time. And as I said here, there is over 1,000 municipalities and there's 1,000 different contexts, and there will be 1,000 different main challenges. But I think the approach to making this work long-term is to start off with an ambition that you think you can keep up with. And specifically, I think the ESBO cases does a really good example of realizing what is the actual challenge here. It might not be groundbreaking or new or innovative, but it's very closely connected to the very real challenges they have. So I think don't be afraid to start small, because that is the way you make this work in a long term, rather than starting a huge project which ends in 2 years and nobody has the energy to keep going. And of course, I think the operational tools that we try to provide here is also very important, but perhaps it's nice to hear a researcher say, don't be afraid to take it easy as well.
Yes, very sage advice. Thank you, Anna. And now we're going to turn to another Anna Bengtsson, who's going to be presenting the final chapter. This one is on designing, and Anna is a landscape architect and senior lecturer at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. She researches and teaches in health promoting outdoor environments, evidence-based design, and environmental psychology. And Anna, you mentioned to me that you live by Skurup, but that you've told me Jordalen in Helsingborg is one of your favorite green spaces. And what's so special about this green space?
Well, Jordbodalen in Helsingborg, it's because that's where I grew up, and this is also a linear park, and it was amazing as a kid to have this park because it gave me my friends this possibility for like real wilderness experiences. So we felt like we had expeditions and adventures. So it was like real nature, but really integrated in the city.
Forest meets the city. That sounds lovely.
Exactly. It's a valley.
Yeah. Well, over to you and your presentation now on the chapter on designing. Just going to give you control. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and to now be able to present this chapter after this long time of working together in this great project. So, and in this chapter, we have been working together, researchers and practitioners, to describe how to work with green space design based on health design theory and also environmental psychology. And the authors are me and Anna Åshage and Patrik Gran from Swedish University of Agricultural Science. So we are the researchers, and then we have practitioners Martina Andersson and Else Dybke from Stavanger municipality. Okay, so next slide. Yes. So in this project, we have used the term evidence-based practice. And we mean with this that practitioners are equipped with evidence concerning green space and health when they work. So, and this evidence firstly concerns more like basic evidence that there are many health benefits connected to using green areas and also to living close to green areas. And this is today like established knowledge, but that these green areas are really important in our everyday life for health and well-being. But today we also know quite a bit about specific qualities, environmental qualities and zones that kind of support people and inspire people to use the outdoors. And we need to know of different needs and preferences of different user groups, like children, older people, people with special needs. But to make this research about health and well-being in connection to green space more useful for practice, we are developing evidence-based models and methods. And to do this, we need to work together, practitioners and researchers. And we have this common goal to develop health-promoting outdoor environments. So we have been working with 3 projects in Stavanger in Norway. It's Byparken, and that's a renovation and new design of a central park. And then we have Sankt Svithun Ungdomsskole, and that's a renovation and new design of a schoolyard for kids aged 13 to 16. And then we have Hamnevika, an industrial area now being redesigned into a recreation area. So we have been working with 3 evidence-based models, and the first one is the principal model of 4 zones of contact with the outdoors. And it identifies 4 zones in which health-promoting interaction with the outdoor environment can take place. So zone 1 is from inside a building through windows. And then we have from inside transition zones, like a balcony, for instance, or a winter garden. And then we have in a garden or park, the zone 3. And then we have zone 4, and that's the surrounding environment. And then zone 0 corresponds to areas inside buildings without contact with the outdoors, no windows. And this model makes aware, for example, that when designing a pocket park in a city, that could be, we see that as a zone 3 space. Natural elements, vegetation, water could have this impact on people who see the pocket park from their window, residential areas nearby, or if we have workplaces, you can see this from your window, but also from the balcony or as you pass by on the street. So it's just to give example of how this could work between the different zones. And then the second evidence-based model that we used is the triangle of supportive environments. And the shape of this model illustrates that the more vulnerable a person is, the greater the possible positive impact of the physical environment. and at the same time also greater need of a supporting environment. And this model also describes this gradient from bottom to the top. At the base, we have preferences and needs of those who are sensitive to overstimulation, for example, mentally vulnerable persons and people experiencing stress. And at the top of the triangle, we have those who need outward directed involvement, like people feeling lonely or isolated. They really seek out environments with more people and would like to share experiences with others. And then we have the third and final model, is the quality evaluation tool. And it describes 19 evidence-based environmental qualities, which are divided into two groups. We have qualities for people to be comfortable to use the outer environment, and we have qualities for people to experience stimulation, positive contact with the outer environment. And these stimulating experiences, they follow this gradient of challenge that I talked about before, like with calm and undemanding impressions in natural environments at the bottom and social and active environments at the top of the gradient. And the QET also describes this overall working process for practitioners to follow to apply these evidence-based models. So we have phase 1, identifying existing zones and help promoting environmental qualities in the area. Phase 2, to identify user perspectives in relation to these models. Phase 3, to design or develop green space using the models. And then phase 4 would be conducting a post-occupancy evaluation. We hope to be able to do this in the future. We didn't come this far in the project yet. So in this chapter, we give examples of how the phases 1 to 3 were used in the design process of Hamnevika. And that's the former industrial area, now designed into recreation area. So in this picture, you see an illustration by the landscape architect Martina Andersson. And it actually shows how the 4 phases fed into the ordinary design process, and also showing that the evidence-based process had to be integrated and adjusted to fit the specific design process of this unique project. And next slide here. And here you see the result of the 3rd phase of the process, the design proposal for Hamnevika recreation area. And here are some of the conclusions from the project, where we find that this way of using evidence in practice, it's useful to just justify and argue for the need of green spaces in people's everyday environments. It's useful to consider the health potential of green spaces, to understand and describe the range of activities and levels of social interaction that is needed at the site in relation to its context. And finally, to highlight perspectives for designing and planning green space, specifically considering stimulation, restoration, and comfort for specific target groups, but also for people in general. So thank you very much for reading, listening, and I hope you will read in the future.
Thank you so much, Anna. Yes, if you all want to know more about these evidence-based design models, please make sure to look into that chapter. And before we go on to some questions in the chat, I wanted to follow up, Anna. And I understand that these evidence-based models need to be adapted to each sort of project and unique city circumstance. So could you share a bit more about how that was done in the Stavanger, in one of those project sites, maybe?
Well, for most projects we have worked with, we have actually learned that the design process is hardly a linear process. So like this phase 1 to 3 takes place in order that best suits the project and the landscape architect. But phase 4, of course, the post-occupancy evaluation obviously needs to take place after the project site has been built and occupied by the users, and then after phase 1 to 3. So both the recreational park and the city park that we work with already had a lot of information from user investigations, like the phase 2 from before. So in these 2 cases, it was more about relating this information to the models rather than using the models to collect information.
Okay.
And I think this non-linear process is illustrated very well by Martina in our chapter and in the illustration I showed you before.
Great, a good plug to go and look at it. We do have some questions for the chat, and so I'm gonna, and they are to all panelists. So I'm kicking off here with a question to Anna Sunding. David in the chat says that in Norway they have national guidelines for local planning concerning the areas of energy, climate, and climate change adaptation. Do you think something similar for nature and health would be a viable approach?
Well, I think, of course, yes, in some way. I think not least because it could clearly set the focus on something that is not greatly regulated in the Nordic countries today. I think Norway is by far the best of regulating in terms of legislative demands, which, and as I mentioned, it's not as much in Sweden and Denmark, for instance. So I think generally, yes, I think it's a good point to try to create some kind of national focus on this. However, I think, as I mentioned, as it is still very much up to the different municipalities to interpret how this is done and how large the focus is, I think it won't be enough. There is still a kind of intermunicipal challenge to deal with to get politicians and this type of programmatic alignment to work within each municipalities, because I think despite the fact that we see regulations on things today, they're still not equally developed in the different municipalities. So yes, I'd say so, but I don't think that would be one step, but it wouldn't be enough, I think.
No, that makes sense. And the second question is both to Marketa and Helena, and it's actually one that I've been thinking about. We have these 4 chapters, and in the chapters, you all have sort of presented different tools that can be used, both for planning, designing, and managing these cities. So is there any way that these tools can work together? So, for example, is there a way to have the observing chapter together with the numbering chapter, meaning using objective and perceived indicators from the numbering chapter together with the PPGIS survey in the observing? So I'll go over to you first, Marketa, and see what you think.
Absolutely. I think they should be combined. And Helena already was mentioning that using the existing GIS data sets and existing surveys, we still don't quite understand what is the environment people are really exposed to, and for example, which parks they really use in their real life. So here, PPGIS methodology, or this participatory mapping methodology, can help.
Helena, do you want to follow up on that?
Yes, and also the PPGIS is also a perfect way of collecting perceived indicators of reaching out to people, asking questions, asking them to map where they are and how they perceive the environment. So absolutely a good combination.
And over to both of our Annas, any final words on this before we go to our panel, but how you see the interplay between your chapters with others in the handbook? It's a bit harder, I guess. It's not as much but the designing and the regulating are sort of a bit more standalone, perhaps.
Well, in the design case, I think actually all other chapters are really relevant,
Yes.
but in different ways, of course. So some of the knowledge you can really maybe use in the very design, like from PPGIS, for instance, there will be a lot of information you can really integrate with these models. And the other chapters will more give you maybe an overall view and understanding, I would say.
Yeah.
But I think there is a really important connection.
Thank you. And I just want to add that the handbook, it's really been written so that you can dive into these chapters separately if one is of particular interest to you. So they are in that essence a bit of a standalone, even though there is application across. So thank you so much to our 4 presenters. We may come back to you towards the end, but now it's time for us to actually hear from some practitioners who have worked with these methodologies. And we have with us Linda Hagen, who is a health strategist from Stavanger municipality. And we have Laura Malm Grönros, planner from Esbo municipality. And we're also going to hear some final comments from Thomas Randrup, who's head of subject for landscape governance and management at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. Now, this NORDGREEN project, I think you all had experienced that it's a joint work between researchers and city partners, and it's really shown different perspectives in how human health and well-being are linked to green spaces. And I wanted to kick off by going to you, Linda. As I mentioned, you're a health strategist in Stavanger, and we know you collaborate with landscape architects and planners. And what triggered this collaboration?
I got to know my colleagues Else Dybkjær and Martina Andersson, working with area-based city development. Then the interface between our disciplines become very clear. There are specific health issues in our urban lifestyle, such as physical inactivity, social isolation, that we can meet by developing a better connected green infrastructure and inclusive design. Through the landscape as architects' work, I understood the importance of green infrastructure and was very inspired by their professional work. It struck me that we had a complementary understanding and goal in social designing good neighborhoods and common spaces through our different professional lenses.
What have been some of the challenges, though?
Oh, municipalities can struggle with employees to cooperate across sectors. In our municipalities, the landscapes architects work in operational department, but I work in a planning department. There are difficult cultures and requirements for task solving is these two departments, while my tasks are about presenting strategies within public health. My colleagues are given clear and defined project tasks. So when we find a wavelength and work together, we see each other in a new way. I have learned a lot about analysis and architects planning. Then I may have inspired them to think a little beyond the concrete task solution.
Yeah, so you sort of mentioned some of the ways that you have helped each other along on the journey, but and what are maybe other synergies? We've mentioned some of the challenges, but what other synergies you've seen between working together?
For example, Anna's Bengtsson mentioned this school, Sunset School. The landscapes architect just got this schoolyard, and I challenged them because the schoolyard is too small for many pupils. So then they looked close to the other municipalities area as roads and areas around to expand the schoolyard. And then we also challenged the role we have daily.
Thank you so much, Linda. And I'm actually going to turn to Laura now. We've heard so much about Esbo and all the different presentations. So we're so happy to have a planner here with us. And Laura, you've worked with at least one of the tools presented in the handbook. Well, all of you have, but you specifically have worked with the PPGIS in Esbo. And how do you think these digital tools change or have changed the practices of the city and their public participation processes? Welcome.
Yes, thank you. We already use a lot of GIS in our work. So within the city, we all use the same system, which Marketta told about, the municipal information system. And it contains all the official GIS data of the city, built environment and nature environment. So during this NORDGREEN project, we created a new GIS dataset, which contained the residents' perspective to the city. And the base data was the My Espo on a Map survey, which we had 6,600 participants and 70,000 answers. So it's a massive data set. And how this affects the city practices? Well, when starting a project, planning the project's participation. This survey data can be used as a basic material and a base level for residents' thoughts about the area, and this data can be used as it is or enriched during the project's own participation. So in a nutshell, I can say that we have brought the participation data to be one of the GIS data sources alongside the hard data sources, and that's a huge step for City of Espoo also.
Yes, a really big step. And following up on that, how have you found the collaboration between the city and working with researchers? How has that been for you?
The cooperation with Aalto University has been excellent. It has been a really great experience. We have managed to create an open and confidential discussion connection where we can brainstorm and share ideas on different things. And the university also participated actively with the planners and hearing closely what they have to say about everyday practical challenges. And the suggestions what the university did for improving practices were thus ones that can be actually implemented to everyday work. So in this way, the university cooperation hasn't remained only an isolated part of a single project, but it has a genuine impact on the city practices.
Yes, that's what we'd love to hear. I'm gonna turn over back to you, Linda, and to that point, that one of the strengths of the NORDGREEN project is really this translation from research to practice, but then also the other way around, from practice to research. And your colleagues there in Stavanger have worked closely with NORDGREEN to redesign different areas of the green of the city. And you mentioned the school, but do you have insight on some of the other places?
Yes, if you talked about Havnevika, we also, this is an area that we have to develop. And I think that it's important for the municipality to just show the challenges here for the people and the health issue. And you have also a lot of people living here with low income. And then the green areas is very important for them because socializing is the most it's the biggest factor for good health.
Yeah, and this specific area is the sort of port, the old port that you're going to redevelop. Is that right?
Yes. And it's this area is not so many green zones from the beginning because it is old industrial part of the town at the east side.
Yes, and you can find more and follow that journey again in the handbook. Coming back to you, Laura, in your experience using the outcomes of the PPGIS, what kind of questions were the most useful for you and for planners that came out of it?
We have done several PPGIS surveys in Espoo several years over the years, and I have been in many of them. So the most useful information is the kind that can be used in different projects, that isn't only in one project, but it can be used widely. And it can be utilized and analyzed in different ways. So this was one of the main things which we were processing with Aalto University, that what are the questions we want to know. And it came to the conclusion that we want to know about everyday places, because that's the thing where the city officers, what we do, the residents see in a small scale and in large scale. Everything we do, the residents see in the everyday life. So we asked about them, and formulating the questions, we also had in mind that people don't want to to answer the surveys anymore. So how can we make a survey so interesting that the residents want to answer them? So we kept the questions minimum, as minimum as possible, and formulated the questions so that they were interesting to answer. But we also had in mind that we want to use this answer material in various analyses. So we had to ask the key questions. And the raw data also had to be valuable itself, so that we could share it in the city information system. So I think we succeeded greatly in this survey, and we are actually doing the survey again this year. And it will be interesting to see what kind of changes are in the answers, especially in the everyday life, because we have, during these 4 years, we have got a new metro line and a new light rail.
Big changes.
Big changes, and what's the input of those in everyday life of those people living in these areas?
Thank you, Laura. And I'm going to turn to one more question to you, Linda, before we're also going to go to Thomas. But you know, politicians and practitioners are advised to pursue these days compact urban development to meet sustainability goals. What arguments are needed to encourage policymakers to adopt policies that sort of preserve and integrate this health-promoting green spaces in our cities? What do you think?
Oh, it's a big question, but analyses ahead of regulation are now increasingly extended to apply to social infrastructure. So it's had to be a part of the system, and meeting places and green structure, if they are part of this checklist, I think it will be easier to mining the gap between planning and policies and the operational level. So I hope in long term that it will increase, and also in Stavanger nowadays, every advisor who will write to the politics, you have to see the consequences for the health, and then the green area is natural a part of this consequence thinking.
Yes.
So it's a part of learning together. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And Thomas, we're gonna come to you now, and you're a co-author of the regulating chapter, and as a researcher focusing on planning and management of green space, I wanted to ask, what changes, sort of following on from what we spoke with Linda about, but what changes within governance do you believe need to be made for cities to deliver these quality green spaces?
Well, thank you all. That's a big question. I had the pleasure to work with Anna on the planning and governance aspects in this project, and so maybe just a few words on how we see governance. And governance is about steering and coordinating internally within the organizations, but not least also between often the public organizations and the outside world, like the stakeholders and the users. So that's kind of the governance part of it. And having said that, also in this project we work with the health relationships to green space, but health is actually just one of many challenges, you know, arising right now and relating to green spaces. So climate change, biodiversity loss, and so on is also on the agenda in almost every city, right? So this a challenge like health and well-being, like Anna Sunding was talking about, you know, can be dealt with as an individual theme on the policy level, right? You know, in order to deliver these quality green spaces, but all these different challenges need to be considered at the same time, and that's basically the challenge. And not only that, as Marketa is talking about, quality is individual. It depends on who you are. So it's multiple. So to deal with all these challenges is actually a governance challenge, basically. And I refer back to maybe what Anna was talking about when she talked about this vertical alignment. I think you followed up on that also, Annika. That there's a need to really have good aligned policies on the policy level, and there's a need for a lot of good overviews and overviews and plans on the tactical level, but not at least there's a need to kind of relate them to what's actually going on in practice, in nature, on the operational level. So that is probably the key challenge.
And so following up on that, what advice do you have then for municipalities on how to best connect strategy and implementation regarding green infrastructure and well-being?
Yeah, another good thing. You're very sharp today. Maybe two things. I think first of all, when we continue on this kind of operational practice level, being out there in the green spaces, in many, almost all cities today, not only in the Nordic countries, but throughout the world, green spaces are dealt with in a very kind of technical manner on the operational level. So it's like they are dealt with, planned for, and developed with as they are technical installations like a road or a bridge or something like that. But they're dynamic. Green spaces are dynamic, and I think there's a need for a different approach to how we look at and deal with green spaces, and actually acknowledge that it's nature, and nature is super dynamic. So that's one thing that we need to look at in a different way, I think. And then secondly, going back to maybe more what was more the core of our chapter, this need for coordination and collaboration and conversations. The 3 C's: coordination, collaboration, conversation, both inside the organizations, but also, reaching out to the stakeholders and the users. So these are probably the two main things.
And I think we have good examples from that in ESPO and reaching out to participants. We have a good example of Stavanger with Linda and Martina and their collaboration. So they really are success stories that we can all learn from.
Sure.
I'm going to actually also turn to the chat because we do have time for a couple questions, and I'm going to bring back also our presenters in case they want to answer, or some of them are to them actually. So I'm first going to go to Helena, where we have a question that health is often linked to urban planning by planning around green spaces, but health is very multifaceted. So how can we find a balance among the different health determinants and make sure that we do not just focus on more obvious green space factors?
Yes, I'm happy about that question. I think it's correct that health is much more than just access to green space.
Yeah,
definitely. And I think it's been addressed several times throughout these presentations as well. It's about facilities, it's about meeting place, it's play spaces. We talked about social dimension. I think Marketa used that word. So it's about a lot of things, but in the NORDGREEN project, the focus was on the green spaces, and that's why the chapter that I talked about was particularly focused on access to green space. But as also Thomas said, there has to be an overview. We have to balance a lot of things, and not only the access to green spaces, of course.
Yes. Thank you, Helena. And over to you, Marketa. We have a question. We focused on green spaces in NORDGREEN, but based on your research and expertise, do you have any information about how these methods could be applied for blue spaces, or how blue space influences health? So maybe a question linking your love of those coastal parks.
Yes, there are actually some exciting pieces of works out there concerning blue spaces. For example, Professor Simon Bell has coordinated a large project, EU project, and they actually use this participatory mapping methodology in that work. So you might want to look at his publications. Also, my team did earlier another study where we focused on blue spaces that people love, and we have also some publications from that project, but there we didn't directly study the health outcomes. So maybe actually, it would be lovely to do another study still and really look at how much time people spend by the water, areas by the water, because that is crucially important to understand this exposure factor that I have mentioned several times. Without understanding that, it is very hard to identify these direct associations between physical environmental characteristics and health.
Thank you, Marketa. So a new research project in the works, perhaps. I wanted, before we end, to turn to all of you and follow up with a sort of a question to look to the future. And when it comes to health promoting green spaces, what questions do you see are going to come up over the next 10 years? And maybe if I can turn to you first, Anna Bengtsson, since you had to present last, you can kick off.
I think I have to think a little bit, and if there is someone who knows directly their answer to this, I'd be happy to give the word to you.
Do we have a hand up? Anyone wanting to start to kick us off? Thomas, thank you.
Yeah, I'll be happy to, but at least throw something in there. I think, you know, this project has been super interesting, and it's been nice to have 3 years, but we can focus on the health-related aspects of it, or health-related aspects to nature, or green spaces or nature. And I think never before have we seen so much interest in green spaces or nature and what is going on. This is seen as the solution to most of the challenges that we out there. Or actually also never has planning and managing for green space been so complex as I was just in about. So yeah. In 10 years time, I really think that we will need to look into, you know, a different way of organizing ourselves in the way that we're dealing with nature and dealing with our lives. And I think actually this thing about being inspired by nature can also be something that we should look into in terms of how we organize ourselves, because nature goes across administrative borders and doesn't really think about, you know, the big boundaries that we tend to set up in planning and managing ourselves. And nature is long-sighted. So I think this combination about being super long-sighted and finding new ways of organizing ourselves is a way forward, and that's definitely something we will look into from a governance perspective.
Thank you, Thomas. Anyone else want to jump in before we close today's webinar? Marketa, yes.
I'm not sure if this answers your question really, but I am dreaming about this new research where we would look at these health outcomes more holistically. Urban planners are in that difficult situation that they have to find out the solution to these different aspects of health, and for example, to the fact that at the same time, green infrastructure and urban density promote health. So how to combine the two, and then include still these social elements, those are the true challenges of urban planners in the near future and already today.
Thank you. Great final words from you, Marketa. And with that, we are sort of running out of time. So I would like to thank all of you presenters and panelists for joining us, and all of you who joined in the audience from so many great cities. As I mentioned earlier, we will share both this recording and the presentations with you in the coming days. I would like to encourage you all to download the handbook, have a look through it, but also to get some time today in green space, hopefully maybe a little sunnier in other cities than here in Stockholm, but at the same time, enjoy some fresh air and have a great almost weekend. Thank you for joining us.